when I change the way I see things, things change.
Tell us more.
So, I was very, very externally focused when we started working together, right? And when you're externally focused, you actually have no control over the externals. We all know that, but everything is happening to you, right? And these people are horrible and they don't know how to lead, and these are not good partners, or these are not a good team, and everything is about everybody else. When you go back and you take a step back and you go, it starts with self, then you have a lot of discovery to do. And that's where the magic really starts, is when you start digging into the self.
Welcome to the Leadership Launchpad Podcast, the Legacy Edition, where conscious leaders unite to unlock their highest potential so collectively we can change the way the game is being played. Welcome back to the Leadership Launchpad Podcast, changing the way this game is being played. And Tracey Allen and I are back in this studio and on this mic, fired up to bring you another awesome riff on conscious leadership. This time I decided to turn the tables on Tracey and pull the curtains back on some of her experience stepping into this style of coaching. And the thing that we really want to dive deeply into is the very entry point, I feel, into conscious leadership, which is where we differentiate the most, I feel like, in the leadership development space, which is in how we really prioritize self-leadership as the entry point to any leadership development and training that we do, whether that's one-on-one coaching with our leaders like this, or it's in our leadership locker rooms where we're working with teams. Regardless, we always get the same kind of sideways look when we really, identify this as the starting point, as the entry point, because this is not commonplace yet here in 2025. Although the data and the research and all of the neuroscience we've been talking about on this show for 5 years supports the fact that self-leadership really is the thing that impacts our leadership of others the most. So yeah, it's interesting how we have a lot of consciousness in terms of the proof and evidence around this, but not a lot of the embodiment or integration in terms of how we're actually developing our leaders. And so what an amazing opportunity, since I have you, one of my clients who's been through this exact methodology and had that experience of differentiation in terms of where we started in your development. And I want to turn the tables on you today, Trace, so that you can actually pull the curtains back and share with our folks what that experience was like for you to actually receive development in the self-leadership arena. Let's help our folks understand how that, changed the way the game was being played for you in terms of your leadership.
Yeah. So I think a lot of times we have this stereotype around leadership training that, they'll come in and tell us how to lead everybody else and how to create a great culture in an organization, and how to, manage our people on a day. And I think what was really surprising when we went through our process is really around the self. And actually, a lot of us think it has nothing to do with us, which is so fascinating, right? When we become leaders, we said, we made it. We're good. We've made it. It's all about them now. I'm good. I got the job, so I'm good. What I discovered through that process, though, is when it really, and that's where that tilting of the head comes in, is that people go, what, I have something to do with this? I'm the boss. I have nothing to do with this. This is all about my peeps. But when you actually have that discussion around how you have such an impact and how it starts with self, then it becomes so clear how you can change everything that you're looking at. So one of the biggest lessons for me through that process was when I change the way I see things, things change.
Tell us more.
So, I was very, very externally focused when we started working together, right? And when you're externally focused, you actually have no control over the externals. We all know that, but everything is happening to you,
Mm-hmm.
right? And oh, these people are horrible and they don't know how to lead, and these are not good partners, or these are not a good team, and everything is about everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
When you go back and you take a step back and you go, it starts with self, then you have a lot of discovery to do. And that's where the magic really starts, is when you start digging into the self. So, where we started was, what's important to me? What are my values? Why am I here? What is my purpose? What is my mission? What is my legacy? Right? Why do I show up every day to work? Is it to just boss people around? Absolutely not. It might look like that from the surface, and if you don't be intentional, you're not conscious about it, that actually might be, or you're there for the money or whatever is bringing you out to your job every day. But when you can get curious and really kind of think about, what is my legacy? Like, why do I want to be here every day? And when that becomes because you want to support and be a great human being and help others, everything changes the way that you start seeing things, right? Then it becomes, well, how do I show up for that? What are
Mm-hmm.
my gifts to enable that in my people?
Mm-hmm.
It's no longer about what everybody else is doing, because it doesn't matter what anybody else is doing. It's actually all in my control. So what we did, right, was get very clear on, what are my values? Why am I here? What's my legacy? And when I got really crystal clear on, I want to be a good leader because I want to change the way that leadership is done. And I work in a big corp. So for me, that example is big corp, because I see tons of different leadership styles. And I truly believe there's a different way of leading, with compassion and empathy, and to really inspire and get engagement from our people, so that they actually want to align their missions, their values, to the corporation's missions and values, so that we're actually, tapping into why they're there, and really kind of taking, advantage of, like, giving them an opportunity and a place where they can show up and tie their missions and values to. And then we all win, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that was a big piece for me, to be able to understand that. When you actually go through that, and I became clear that my role then became to be there for them and to support them and enable them, everything else didn't really matter what was happening to me. And then it became, I could spot where leadership didn't align with mine. But it became
Mm-hmm.
okay, because it's like, what? That's not the way I want to be anyway. So what? Let's just be clear, because the neuroscience plays into all this. This is not just a couple coaching sessions. This is a long process. It's iterative. It comes into clicks as you go, and you keep discovering yourself and you keep doing the work. But what I learned is that, people come from different paths of life. They all have their own experiences, and the way that they show up as leaders is, a byproduct of that.
Mm-hmm.
And if they don't do the work, and they're not conscious, and they're not really digging and understanding where they are, they're showing up in the way that they best can.
Mm-hmm.
And so by me being able to just kind of excuse that and say, what, that's your stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to stay in my lane. I know why I'm here, and I'm not going to let you affect me,
Mm-hmm.
and have those boundaries and stay into my own power. That's when I can show up best for my people. And now, after years of doing this work, my mission is to set up my people into that fashion, right? I want them. And they look at me the same way when I say, let's start with self. Let's not look at all the uncontrollables and me and blame the company. Let's look at you.
Mm-hmm.
Why are you here? Let's go deep to get to know what your values are, why you're here. And let's try to align that to the corporation's missions and make that tie, so that I can help you feel good and wake up every day to be here.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And then all that stuff, as they keep digging into themselves and they feel like they have control of their own career, they have control of their own workload, they can show up in the best way that they can. That's when they feel empowered. And that's when we can create like authenticity. And that's when we get into trust. And that's when they can be open because they know I want them to be their real selves. I don't want them to be somebody else. With all respect, of course, always, right? As a foundation, we need to always, but feedback and being able to have open conversations around, what is working for them, what is not working for them, how I can better help and set them up. Those are like honest conversations that I want us to be able to have. But that means people need to feel safe. They need to feel trusted, and they need to know that I want that from them, so that we can work on that together. So for me, self is like absolutely the most probably game changer study and work that we've done together, because I think if you bypass that, you actually never get to the point of really understanding yourself, but also then having control of all your own feelings and emotions. Because when you leave it to everybody else, people will trigger you all day long. And you're letting yourself be dragged into that. But when you get into self-leadership, you can decide, I'm not going to engage in that. I'm going to stay in my power. I see where that's coming from. I see you, and I see that you have some work to do, but I'm going to excuse you for that today, but I'm going to stay here. Like, what a way better way to live your life than letting people drag you around with their own, emotions and triggers and issues that they're going through all day long.
Yeah, the difference between striving and thriving, we said, right? And it really is a difference that is impacted by this one core theme that you keep circling around, which is stepping to the helm consciously in our self-leadership, which you said at least 4 or 5 times is where you take your power back, And that really is the TSN turning point in everything that you just described, as it is with all the leaders that we run through this type of methodology, right? Is that because our forefathers and foremothers were leading us from a powerless model, meaning that they weren't in their power, right? Because they were powering over and seeking to control the things outside of them so that they can control the way they feel inside of themselves, right? But this is also something that we talk about all the time. That model carries the most weight, meaning that our role models obviously are the ones that carry the most weight in terms of how we lead ourselves. And when that's left to the unconscious devices of, our autopilot, like we've also been exploring this summer, then it's just rinse and repeat in terms of that powerlessness that's now starting to cascade, right, into our people's experience and then throughout our organizations and then onto our customers. But where we consciously break that cycle, right, and we decide to step to the helm and consciously see ourselves, including the model that we're running on as a starting point because of our foremothers and forefathers, that's where we really start to reclaim the empowerment to be able to make new choices. And this is everything, right, that we've been knee deep in celebrating in terms of why we truly believe that conscious leadership has the potential to change the way the game is being played. Because, when we're actually able to take our power back, step into our agency, and really start to align our belief systems and our values with who we truly are at our core authentically, there's a lot that's going to change in terms of your impact as a leader, right? It's like now your people are going to have a completely different model. Let's just start there. An entirely different model of possibility, we say, even with our children, right? Because when they see us leading in authenticity, when they see us leading in these empowered ways, when they can feel the inspirational backdraft that comes from us being so engaged because we're passionately aligned with that which we care about most and believe we're bringing the best of ourselves towards that, that's infectious energy, right? And that's why the model is such an integral starting point, I believe, in terms of stepping into self-leadership, to make sure that the model we're running on is based on our truth, because our people can feel that. It creates a ton of safety and permission, actually, for them to be able to step into theirs. And then that ripple effect that ensues is the game changer, right?
How do you know how to grow or where you need to do, make some tweaks or shifts if you don't get the feedback?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a perfect example of, like, in the past, I wouldn't give feedback because I didn't want the people to feel bad.
Yeah.
Because I knew when I got feedback, I didn't like it. That was my beliefs, that was me, how I interpreted that. So I assumed nobody else wants it. But how do we help people improve their performance if we can't simply have a conversation with some nuggets on helping them grow? Yeah.
So I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about that, right? Because I think that this is something that when we first connected, we both felt very passionate about is the unconsciousness in and around how we're showing up as leaders in terms of how we're leading ourselves, and how in 2025, again, even though we know all of these things with the data, the research, and the science, there's still not a lot of that going on sometimes in the models that are carrying so much weight in terms of our people's experience. So how did you find the courage to be able to step into such vulnerability, given the reality that you and I both share, which is like these models were kind of hard to come by, back in our day in terms of our ascension?
Yeah. I think for me, it was, I knew that, the way I was running, very externally focused, was unhealthy. I remember days when I would answer emails no matter what, the minute they came in, because I felt in scarcity, that I would not be able to, they wouldn't see me as a key person. I felt like I was on the treadmill trying to show up for everything, and put things aside, like my family and everything, to be able to externally manage how I was showing up, which is like, I knew it wasn't sustainable, and I knew I was worth more than that. And I couldn't get to a point where I had enough confidence or stayed, true to myself and to what I wanted. So I was always misaligned because it wasn't necessarily leaders that were leading me that way, but it's my own way I was thinking about things. I felt like I would ruminate on things all the time, saying, well, they must think I'm not a good, I'm not good at this because I didn't explain it maybe with the perfect words. And then when I would actually dig into it later and say, was that okay? Like, did I do an okay job on that? They'd be like, of course it was. Like, they didn't even think about it. So that's when I started realizing, like, I have this like
Internal
belief,
critic.
that's not aligned with what I'm seeing, and then I'm suffering through that. It's really not fun. And I knew that it wasn't sustainable. It wasn't something I wanted to feel for the rest of my life. I knew I was here for a reason. I just didn't know what it was yet. And so, the courage came because I wanted it to stop, and I wanted to really kind of get alignment with that, and I wanted to really be true to myself. And the process is, and we'll talk a little bit about the consciousness is so important, right? It's really about being still and listening to yourself. Like, as much as having a coach is super important to ask all those great questions to understand your belief systems and what you're here for, but you and I, had talked about it, and, you got me to start meditating and really kind of getting still and thinking about, like, letting things come through to me so I could be quiet and actually feel what I wanted, so that I could actually start really getting courageous and doing the work, because the signs and the messages come through when you actually can be quiet with yourself. And that brings the consciousness too, right? Because you hear it and you're like, this is how I want to feel. okay, if this is how I want to feel, what needs to change for me to feel like that? What makes me feel like that? Okay, like,
Mm-hmm.
so it's not necessarily a coach. You need to actually sit and be within and think
Mm-hmm.
about these things and try to feel them and test them and try to make those connections emotionally to actions,
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think that's where things really started coming together for me. But the courage, I would say, came from I had enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I knew there was more for me to why I was here, but I all I knew is I was serving a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
I was jumping for everybody, but I had no idea why. And I was lost in the middle of that because I was so focused on serving everybody else and making sure everybody else is happy. And I was the bottom of the list of that, right? That's when
Mm-hmm.
I knew that's just not, it's not what I'm here for. I can
Mm-hmm.
do more. I can be better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, pain often is the catalyst, right, to our
Mhm.
untapped potential, and definitely with high achievers, because high achievers, like Tracey just explained, run ragged here, there, everywhere. Oh, so much responsibility, right? Like, how the heck do they even know how they're feeling half the damn time? They don't, right? Because even that is something they've learned to maladaptively control by their suppress, repress, and deny ways.
Mhm.
But ask and you shall receive, right? And that's what me suggesting you start to silence the monkey mind and go into meditative states so that you could actually really start to access all the intel that was that whisper of, there's more than this, right? Or,
Mhm.
we could be doing things a little bit differently and not suffering so much, right? Those whispers start to get louder and louder until eventually you've awakened that inner, GPS or compass. And that's
Mhm.
the place I want to dig next. In fact, is helping our people understand the TSN turning point in terms of what was showing up on the other side of learning how to take your power back by stepping to the helm consciously in your self leadership, going from all this outside in striving, we call it, right, to inside out thriving. What was the impact to you in terms of your quality of experience or life or leadership? And then how did you see that in terms of the impacts on your people?
Mhm. Yeah, I think it took like it was a long journey. I would say it was probably like 5 years before I really kind of now I would say in the last year probably really feel in my power. I had to go through lots of learning, a lot of like difficult times, and
Mm-hmm.
had to trust the process, right? In
Mm-hmm.
terms of what's going to come for me because I wasn't happy and I knew that I had some work to do. And when I actually got serious about doing the work and really kind of understanding that it all starts with myself and it all
Mm-hmm.
starts with the way I look at things and understand who I am and what I am here for. Um, that's when, things really started to change for me. And I think that what happens in that time when you actually take that power back and really understand, that now this is all about what I can create and I can co-create with whatever is around me and who is with me, being selective, but being able to show up for my people with more vulnerability, more compassion, more empathy, because I felt safe. I know who I am.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't need to hide behind anything. And if
Mm-hmm.
people don't like it, don't care.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not hurting people. I'm actually helping them.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm actually using my own authenticity and my own gifts to enable my people. So
Mm-hmm.
then creating safe spaces for my people, bringing them into talking about self leadership, um, you know, helping many people just within, new talent in the company or whatever talks. I love doing that because I know I'm serving other people and I get such, great feedback. And if I can just change or light up somebody in someone in one talk, that it just makes me so happy because that's what I'm here for, right? So by doing that and being true to yourself and then showing up like that in every capacity of your life is a ripple effect that you can spread, right? Across your
Mm-hmm.
family, across your people, across your leader, anybody, because you're oozing it and you're being
Mm-hmm.
honest,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to sitting back and holding all the messages in because you think that it doesn't align with what they want.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes they don't know what they want because they're not conscious and they haven't really got clear on what they want. So by giving them a little bit, you might actually spark something in somebody,
Mm.
which keeps me really inspired to keep doing what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm. Are you surprised when meet with maybe people for the first time that come onto your teams and you see like that they don't have any of this way of orienting towards their role or their professional lives? Like,
Mhm.
does that surprise you when you see people coming to the table for the first time exploring this kinds of work with you? Or do you find that because you're in such a strong model of possibility and it's so infectious, right? That maybe even though they haven't had that before, that they're even more inclined to want to lean in and engage in these types of lessons with you. Like what are your people's response, especially when they haven't had this type of development before?
I think there's a lot of them are surprised maybe with the way that I engage in those kind of conversations, but I think a lot of them are welcoming it. I
Hmm.
get a lot, not on the spot, but after the fact, I will get lots of texts and emails saying, I appreciate your vulnerability. I appreciate you asking me. Nobody's ever asked me that.
Hmm.
Like, so I think people want it. I think people
Mm-hmm.
need it. Not everybody, by the way, but most, I would say, do. Um, and yeah, and I think that I've seen it like a few times over the last few years, but even just somebody on my team right now, she will say to me, "You inspire me." And I am so happy to have you as a boss. Like, I
Aw.
just love that you give me so much. And now she's exploring herself, which makes me so happy, because
I
like you're
bet.
really changing, you're having an impact on your people. And I mean, we're all humans, we're all here to evolve together. And what better way than to help each other,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So, like I said, just even changing one and lighting up anybody, anything and anybody, it just fills my cup.
I know it does. Yep, I know that that hits you in the fulfillment for sure. And then in terms of the last thing I feel like we need to just close the loop on is, does this actually drive performance? Would you say
Mm,
in terms of like business outcomes and results and all of
yeah.
this? Because like I think what we're seeing in terms of the strategy piece here, right, is like when you can show up in full authenticity and vulnerability, right? Like it is because you found safety inside.
Mm-hmm.
And because you have that safety inside, you can show up consciously co-creating with your people's experience, which means
Mm-hmm.
completely present and dialed into their experience empathetically, which then
Mm-hmm.
brings them into safety. And then you are talking about all of these things that you do in your self-leadership that you're so fired up about. And obviously that coming from a space, a place of authenticity gives them permission to show up fully as they are in terms of their explorations about what they can contribute and why, but it must create so much psychological safety and trust, and that must drive even greater levels of engagement. And how could that not drive better business outcomes? But what is your experience with that?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that we're kind of exploring that right now. I've learned through my team and I'll take an example like feedback. And we talked about feedback a couple weeks ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or even last week, I think. How do you, and we talked about this, how do you know how to grow or where you need to do, make some tweaks or shifts if you don't get the feedback?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a perfect example of like in the past, I wouldn't give feedback because I didn't want the people to feel bad
Yeah, yeah.
because
Mm-hmm.
I knew when I got feedback, I didn't like it. But that was
Mm-hmm.
my beliefs, that was me, how I interpreted that. So I assumed nobody else wants it. But how do we help people improve their performance if we can't simply have a conversation with some nuggets on helping them grow? So that one for me was like a game changer, because now I am all about open feedback, obviously always constructive with lots of love and compassion and respect, but it has to be done because people don't know what they don't know, because they don't know what the expectations are sometimes. So giving that feedback is like, that is really important piece to be able to turn the performance on. The other thing that I believe, and I'm trying to do right now, is be very clear on what is the corporation's objectives and how can I tie that to my individuals in my team in terms of their values and missions and why they're here. And if I can make that connection to that purpose that they're here, that makes their everyday so much more impactful and engaged, because they actually know that they're showing up for why they're here and this is their passion and what their impact is. So if you can make that, people then feel connected to the whole mission of the company, which is so important, because we all spend 70-80% of our time at work, right? And if you imagine if you weren't connected to the mission of the company and you have to do this every day, you have to find other things that ignite you, which can be done. But why don't we, on all full cylinders, be connected to the mission and the purpose, be engaged and show up in a trust environment with psych safety, with good leadership, with compassion and empathy for our people, where we can show up 200% like ourselves every day? Isn't that the dream job for our people?
One would think, wouldn't they? You said all cylinders. I feel like that's all we need to know about why this integrated approach to leadership development and training is so game changer. Because when you can actually bring your whole self into that room, that actually is the right condition, because it is the condition that makes you feel safe to bring that into, right? Even in the context of work, then obviously that's where you're going to get the most in terms of that in human being's potential, right? And so this is why I'm just so confused as to why we're leaving half of that equation on the table by skipping over the part of that equation that we can actually control, right? Which is our role in terms of how we're showing up and contributing the best of what we got. And then us as leaders, making sure that we understand our role in that too, because they're looking to us to know how to feel in regards to governing those decisions that even allow that potential to see the ice. Oh, I feel like this has been such a ripe conversation yet again, as it has been every single Tuesday this summer here on the LOP. I am so deeply and thoroughly enjoying this excavation process, especially where you and I go deep in terms of our experiential understandings and learnings with this stuff. This is obviously hitting the sweet spot today, right, Trace? What's your final call for our folks out there who are listening to this, and maybe they're, leaders, they lead a lot of people, and they haven't had somebody come to them and suggest that they start in the self-leadership arena? What would your final call be to any of those leaders listening who are curious about this and maybe even feeling inspired to get this party started themselves?
Yeah, I think that what I would recommend is really to get curious around why you're here. What impact do you want to have on the world? Maybe sit still for a little bit. Go sit with self and ask some very curious questions around what makes you happy, why you're here, what do you want to leave when, what do you want people to say about you when you leave, and just maybe get into a little bit of meditative state. See if you can come up with anything, because that's really gonna joggle what you need to get you going, right? And of course, if you need a coach you know where to find the coaches. There's tons of, Elite is a prime example. There's, probably some others. There is others for sure. But having that sounding board and a little mirror to hold somebody to help you with that is really, really where you can get going. But I can tell you that it was all worth it. The journey is long and it's a lot of work, but after you get through it, everything changes, like I said. When you start looking at things differently, things around you start changing and the possibilities are endless.
Yeah, that's what keeps me on the path for life. I know we're saying the journey's challenging, and we've talked a lot about how challenge is actually a good thing. Pressure is a privilege. We need it to catalyze our growth and potential. It's also kind of why we're here as human beings, I believe, is to see what we're made of and to discover more and more of our capacity. And that is fun. I think you guys have enough evidence over the last summer months of these podcasts to see that this state don't lie when we actually get to show up in alignment in these ways that we've described today and all on the other episodes thus far this summer. I also want to say this is why you see Tracey and I with nature as backgrounds, right? It's like, yeah, we prioritize conscious leadership practices like what she's just, described in her final call, like getting out into nature so we can ground our nervous system, so we can get deep into that meditative state and place. And that really is where we're going to tap into where those possibilities become endless. So please let us know how this show and all the other shows thus far here in the summer of conscious leadership have been landing for you. We're right at the tail end of summer, about to send our girls back to school in a week. So we're coming to the finish line here in terms of this little pilot podcast project that we launched this summer. And we want to hear from you because we're in the year of co-creation. And that means we want to make sure that this is landing. We want to hear how it's landing. We want to hear if there's anything else before we go that you would like us to dig into on our final episode next week in terms of the summer months. So please email me, Susan@elitehighperformance.com. If there is something you've been wanting to ask all summer but haven't yet had the courage to reach out and put on our radar, you heard it from us here today, folks. This courage piece is absolutely the starting point to conscious, heart-centric leadership, right? So we want to hear from you in terms of that, and then anything else in terms of inquiries about this style of coaching, about this style of leadership development and training. Please go over to the website, elitehighperformance.com, where you can find all our information on that. The last thing I'm going to ask in gratitude for your being here today, please help us share this ripple effect as far and wide as we can. We're here to change the way this game is being played, and we really believe that we have the potential to do that with episodes like these. So go hit like, hit subscribe on your way out the locker room doors today, and share this episode with a friend or a colleague who you think would also benefit from being on this mission with us. That's it. That's all for this week. We'll see you back here next Tuesday.